ask for an adoption of the agenda. If someone move that. Nicole, seconder Cody. All those in favor? Motion carried. Just announcements from the mayor. I just really want to say to Tania and her group of people in finance, thank you. Thank you for listening to my concerns and for what we're going to see today. I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So we're going to basically do a review for those of you around the council table and a bit of an introduction and a go over of the long-term financial plan for those that are here and those that are watching hopefully in the live streaming. So the purpose of today's meeting is to explain from a high level the city's draft 2019 budget and related long-term financial plan, which will form the basis for the city's 2019 to 2023 financial plan bylaw. After this short presentation, council and staff welcome your comments and feedback as they relate to the 2019 budget and related long-term financial plan. And so please take this opportunity to speak as we value your input and your perspective, and you have until March 12th to email them to me. We'll go over that. So the first thing we're going to discuss a little bit is why a long-term financial plan. A longer time frame allows for better decision making. So this is the second year of the 15-year plan, and as we go, we will refine it. We do need to remember that forecasting isn't 100% accurate, so the long-term financial plan represents staff's best estimates today of what is likely to happen in the future. As we get farther out in time, the likelihood of the estimates being out or off obviously increases. And then the estimates, but they still provide us with the information we need to make valuable decisions today. Long-term financial plan allows decision-making to switch from being reactive to proactive. This allows us to prepare for tomorrow. It's important to consider what is likely going to happen in the future when we're making decisions today. Forecasting allows us to build a plan that builds up reserves and surpluses to improve the city's financial resilience, especially if unexpected expenditures do come along or if costs increase more than we are expecting them to. This creates financial resilience, which will help reduce the volatility of property tax and user fee increases. It helps keep increases consistent over time rather than having large fluctuations from year to year to cover expenditures that may not have been planned for. And then we are in the second year of the new long-term model, like I stated, with new policies and procedures in place to help us along the way, and these will be built upon to create a more sustainable future for Revelstoke. And in the end, all this allows council to consider the long-term impact of budget decisions they're making today. So a little bit of a review about what the process looks like. It starts out with strategic priorities that are established by council. I will point out that our new council has not had that opportunity to establish those priorities yet. And because of this long-term financial plan is based on the strategic priorities of the previous council. This council will be participating in a strategic planning session soon, and the results of that will then guide staff in the preparation for next year's budget and long-term financial plan. So once the strategic priorities are established, staff use that to build the long-term plan based on those priorities and to maintain the core service levels that the city provides. Council reviews the core plan. When they review the core plan, they consider factors that impact the service delivery of the various departments, the costs of maintaining the current services and programs, and the tax increases that are needed to maintain those core services, or core budget as we like to call it. After council has reviewed the core plan, they consider the spending package requests for new, improved, or expanded services, and these are requests that go beyond the current core service levels, and so there's always an additional tax increase that relates to those. Council reviews all these requests. They decide which requests, if any, they want to include in the draft long-term plan. So then council approves the draft long-term plan, which is what happened at the last meeting, and so now we're on to the next step, which is this part, which is that we look for public feedback. So the meeting today forms part of that process. The feedback received will be documented and form part of the public record, and then the public can also provide feedback by email, or they can mail it or drop it off at City Hall as outlined in the guide, and it's on the very last page on page 27. So council will next, after today, will consider that public feedback. I will bring it back to council at a committee of the whole meeting on March 21st, where council will be presented with all of the feedback that has been received, and then council will then make their decisions on the final budget that they will approve and that feedback that's received. And then out of that will come the final financial plan that will then go into the bylaw that you will see shortly after that. So, impacts of the 2019 budget. Overall, there's a proposed 4.5% property tax increase. This is across all property tax, or all property classes at this point. The distribution of this tax increase hasn't been determined completely yet. That will be done when the revised assessment roll is released by BC Assessment in March, late March, early April. And we will discuss the distribution of the tax increase across the different classes at the Committee of the Whole meeting on April 11th. There was also the fees and 219 fees and charges bylaw, which was adopted in December 2018, included a 10% fee increase for water and sewer rates, a 30% increase for Big Eddy water fees, and then a 1.7% increase for garbage rates. So in the end, the annual taxes and fees on an average valued house. So the average valued home in Revelstoke for 2019 is currently $389,000. And so that's what this represents. If you happen to have the average home, then this is what your tax bill with this proposed draft budget would look like. I have a whole bunch of numbers here. As you can see on the screen, the tax dollar increase is approximately 63. So the little blue boxes are the actual increase amount, and the whole bar, the gray and the blue, shows the total amounts paid. You'd end up with total taxes, water, sewer, and garbage fees of about $23.50 on the average home. Now this is for the main part of the city, not the Big Eddy. The Big Eddy is slightly different. For Big Eddy properties, because they don't pay sewer fees and they pay a different water fee from us, their taxes would be about $2,008. Then for properties in Narrow Heights that are not on the city's sewer system, they'd be looking at about $2,038 because they pay a higher water fee than Big Eddy property. This is all before the homeowner grant. So the basic grant, of course, is $770 if you live in your home. And if you qualify for the additional grant, then you get a grant of $1,045. And that would be to reduce those total taxes. Just one thing to point out, your tax notice also includes taxes that the city collects for other taxing authorities. This is the school tax that we collect on behalf of the province. We collect taxes for the Columbia Shoe Shop Regional District. We collect taxes for the North Okanagan Hospital District, the library, BC Assessment, and the Municipal Finance Authority. So this is just talking about your municipal taxes. So the impacts, another way of looking at the impacts of the 2019 budget for the average homeowner would be to look at the different values of homes. And so we've looked at a home that's valued at $250,000. You'll see that the total increase is about $9.50 a month. If you have a home that's valued at approximately $500,000, then you're looking at about $13 a month in additional taxes and fees. And then if you happen to have a home that's valued at $750,000, you'd be looking at just over $16 a month in additional fees. So you see that the increase in fees is for water, sewer, and garbage, not Big Eddy water again, because most people pay all the taxes, or all the fees. Sorry. So if your home is assessed, if your home's assessment value went up more than the average increase this year, which was 18%, you are going to see a higher than 4.5% increase. If your home went up less than 18% in value over the previous year, you will see less than 4.5%. It is working on averages. So we're going to now talk about the cost of maintaining core services. So first we're going to talk about the total net revenue increases. So there is a number of different ups and downs that represent this 5.4% increase in revenues that's budgeted. And this is not taxes, this is just other revenues. The biggest one in there would be the Resort Municipality Initiative. It accounts for $500,000 of that increase. In previous years, in 2018 2018, when we were doing the budget for 2018, we were told that the program was going to finish partway through the year. And so we only had $500,000 in revenues in there, and now it's a permanent program, according to the province. And so we're bumping back up the revenues to reflect the additional revenues that we're going to get. You will see a corresponding increase on the other side for the expense side of it. The other adjustments, there's a small adjustment for the non-market change. Last year we included a budget in 2019 of $100,000 for additional property tax revenues from non-market change. This year, looking at the numbers, we're only probably going to get about $75,000, so I had to adjust that estimate downwards. I did get to increase the budget amount that I've got for utility taxes and grants in lieu of taxes. So the utility taxes come from the different utility companies in town for what I like to call the long skinny stuff they have all over the city. And so I'm looking at, I get some information in advance from them, and so based on that information, I've increased the budget revenue I'm expecting from that. I've increased it by about $70,000. I did do a decrease in transit revenues. We were historically over budgeting for them compared to what we've been receiving, so that had to be decreased. I did an increase in the license and permit revenues, again to reflect historical levels. Not as high as what they were last year, but looking at a historical average. I also did the same thing with penalties and investment income. As interest rates increase and our investments grow, we earn more investment income, and so I'm increasing the budget for that. So the other thing I want to point out is that 5.4%, if we didn't have the Resort Municipality Initiative numbers in there, where did I put the number? Shoot, it's 1.1% would be the actual increase. So that's how much the Resort Municipality Initiative is increasing our overall budgeted revenues. Yeah.
Can I just ask, maybe that you just, because I think we understand it here, Council, but just for the public, if anybody's watching, to explain to them the RMI that it comes in and then
it goes back out
and what it's used for?
It's used for resort municipality funding infrastructure for tourism. And yes, it does come in and it goes out. So the increase in revenues is reflected in the 625. The increase in expenses is reflected in the 839. 500 of that is the Resort Municipality Initiative.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had somebody yesterday thought that was money just coming to the city. So I was trying to...
It does, and it gets used within the city.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's on that committee.
But it's exactly, yes. The
Thank
use
you.
of it can't be used for general revenues, unfortunately.
Thanks.
So the next one we're going to look at is the core budget increases for our expenditures. So the biggest driver of this would be wages and benefits. I have to budget for an increase in the union contract. There's been some adjustments to wages within the city to bring them in line within the city itself, between different departments, as well as with market levels across the province. There are some mandated increases that we've had to do operationally for the arena. So we have to staff more there, and so there's a cost to that. We've also had to increase wages for operational changes for snow removal with the new roundabout coming in and a few other changes like Thomas Brook being added. The costs for snow removal go up. What else have I got? The introduction of the new employer health tax. So that is an extra $122,000 a year that the city will have to pay out on its wages and benefits. It represents about a 1.1% tax increase. The good news is that next year we will not have to pay for MSP premiums anymore, and that'll save us about $60,000. So it is a bit of a timing difference, but we have to bring them up this year. So the savings next year will help to reduce the tax increase next year, which would be nice. I got some balance of costs for new positions. So we added a couple of new positions last year, a second building inspector and a GIS technician. They were only budgeted in 2018's budget for part of the year. Now I have to adjust the budget for the full year because they are here for a full year now. And finally, I did an adjustment down. Our budgets for fringe benefits were higher than what we've been historically experiencing. Not really sure why, but we've adjusted the budgets down now to reflect that, and so that was a budget decrease of about $200,000. The other things that would be in there is an increase in the transit contract costs. I've matched it up to what they're giving us in their annual budget. And then, like we talked about, the increase for the Resort Municipality Initiative Program, which is $500,000 of additional expenditures. So, yeah. And then the last thing is the other increases, and this is the additional 1% that council approved to go into the Transportation Infrastructure Reserve. So that money is going straight into the reserve fund to support the growing need to maintain and rehabilitate our extensive road system. So that's the cost of maintaining core services. It reflects a core budget increase of 3%. So the cost of new services, the approved spending packages requests are as follows. The top one is a new communications and engagement officer. The part year cost of this is $51,000 is shown there. It'll be an additional amount of that as well in 2020. The next one is the addition of a summer student for IT. That's $27,500 this year. It'll be $25,000, not additional, but it will go down to $25,000 a year after the first year because of some initial costs that go in there. Manager development services, we're adding in $75,000 this year for the wages for that. Next year we'll have to add an additional $25,000 to that for wages and benefits. And then the contracted services for victim services, this is to add a part-time contract position to support the current victim services coordinator, and that's an additional $26,000 a year. That's a one-time cost increase this year. So the total of all that is 1.5%, which is where we get the 4.5% property tax increase. So, everyone's still awake? So next we're going to look at a little bit what the different operating budgets look like. So this is the general operating fund. I've just broken it out by type of expenditure first. So it just shows you what makes up the largest portions of our budget, and the biggest one would be salaries, wages, and benefits. And then it obviously goes down a little bit from there. The next one is debt payments and transfers to reserves. Those total about $4.4 million a year. So 3.5 is going into reserves, and the other 0.9 is going towards our debt payments. And then we have some program costs. That would be things like the recreational programs. Also, the RMI program costs are in there. So it's a fairly large chunk because of that. And then, obviously, contracted and professional services and office and maintenance kind of costs. So that's what it looks like by expenditure type. And then we'll look at it by department. So this shows a breakdown of the expenditures for the various different departments. I think most of them are fairly clear. General government includes administration, finance, IT, labor management, that kind of things. Protective services obviously is fire, water, and bylaw. Engineering and public works, I think that's fairly clear. The garbage function, cemetery, and around. Social and community development would include our youth services program. The CBT grant program is in there. There's a couple of the smaller amounts. So the social development coordinator would be in there as well. Yeah, so that's kind of what it looks like when you look at it on a departmental level.
Why is the cemetery at zero?
Because it's such a small dollar value of the total budget, it actually is probably like point something, yeah. I think it's like $127,000.
Self-sufficient.
It's self-sufficient, yeah. Unfortunately not.
It's a bad time.
We get some grant funding from CSR.
Yes, it does come back as a cost-sharing function for the from the CSRD. So they actually, whatever it costs us, they collect it. It's collected in the CSRD tax rate that you pay on your property tax notice, not in your municipal. But it is one of our functions, and so we include it. Yeah.
You're here to ask them.
Well, just like
Yeah, it looks like
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just on the previous slide there. Just
Yeah.
Contracted and professional services.
Yes.
What's involved?
Snow removal, RCMP contract would be in there. Those would be the two biggest ones. Also, any legal auditing, that kind of thing. If somebody hires a contractor to help them do something, then it would also be included in there. So sometimes engineering's got consultants, or development services might have consultants. Finance has had them in the past. Probably all the departments in some way, shape, or form have some contracted services.
And for clarity, the debt payment that we're making is mostly to do with the rec center, is that correct?
Oh, sorry, I can't tell you the breakdown of the total. I'd have to look at the details. But the community center is definitely a big chunk of it. There's no doubt about it.
And we're due to finish that in
I will talk about that in a little bit, what's coming up and what's going to come off the books.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's 3.9 from that percentage you said is going to reserves, right? About 20%?
Of the 20%?
Yeah.
I don't know what the percentage is, but it's about 3.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah, million, not percentage.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. The total dollar value. Yeah, oh, like I'm looking at the wrong piece of paper. Looking at the water, it's like that doesn't make sense. Yeah, the total amount that 20% represents is 4.4 million, of which about 3.5 is transfers to
Okay,
reserve.
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the debt payment's only about $1 million with principal.
Yeah, about that, yeah, and that's principal and interest, yes. So the next one we look at is the water utility operating plan, and so it's kind of mostly transfers to reserves in that one, and that's because we're trying to build up the reserve fund for the water utility to be able to afford to pay for some of the larger capital that's expected to come out. And so the Illicilla water crossing is one of them. A big chunk of that has to get funded out of reserves, and so we're starting to build them up now to pay for it next year, this year and next year. And then debt servicing costs, and then there's the various different parts of the water system, the reservoir, the connections, the fire hydrants, moving the water around, and Greeley Creek, which is our treatment plant. So, Big 80 looks pretty similar. They have wells instead of Greeley Creek. That's the difference. They have a well instead of Greeley Creek. So otherwise, it's not bad. Their debt servicing costs will make up a big part of the cost for running that utility at this time. It's fairly new, so there's not as much in maintenance costs going on and things like that in this one. It's also the same people maintain all three utilities, and so we're just trying to kind of fine tune where the administrative costs are going. So the administration costs in this fund are quite a bit lower. And so, yeah. And then finally the sewer. Again, there's administration costs, a big chunk getting transferred to reserves to try to help pay for the sewer treatment plant upgrade that's coming soon. And then debt servicing costs at this time aren't a huge portion of it, but they're definitely good. So then we're going to look at the 5-year general capital. I'm just going to go over some of the larger plans. This is not everything that's being done in the next. This is actually 5 years that I'm looking at here, but the total spending over 15 years is budgeted to be $78.3 million. That includes the DCC project for the roundabout over on 4th and Townley. We consider it a DCC project because it's partly funded from DCCs, but I have included it in here because it really is a general capital project for all intents and purposes.
Sorry, Tanya, can I just ask a quick question? The 78.3, is that the total cost or is that the city funded?
No, it's total cost.
Right, okay.
Yeah, not the city funded. And so I don't have that, I didn't grab, the way the spreadsheets work, I didn't grab the granted amount out of that, unfortunately. But there is some larger ones. One would be the roads. There's about $5 million being provided for 4th and Townley. There's another $1 million that we're funding out of gas tax. There's a $12 million in funding for the arena roof that's in there, and then there's some other very small ones. That's most of the grant funding that would be in that 15-year plan is identified in the next 5 years, because obviously 5 years out, we don't have any grant funding in place yet for any of those projects.
Right.
Yeah.
Just for perception though, the $78 million price tag coming out is a fearful.
It is a big number, definitely, definitely. And we've been very, very lucky. We've had some great staff that have managed to get some really good grant funding for us that has helped with the current large projects we've got. Hopefully, we can continue that success rate and continue to receive grants, large grants for large capital projects. We can't count on them, so I can't budget for it that way. But we do have, like I said, we've done a really good job of getting grants to pay for a lot of these capital works.
And for the public perception, the splash park's already been generated some income for, and that was done by an effort outside of the council. The arena roof, $13 million is conjecture. We don't know what we're going to do on that yet.
Yeah.
There's many things on there that are just potential.
Yeah, exactly.
Same with the Williamson Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Tanya, on the document that was released, there's the one project that doesn't look like it was included for the roundabout. Is that
The
correct?
fifth,
Yeah.
it's roads, 4th Victoria Townley. It's
Did it
about,
get revised and resubmitted, like to the public?
no,
Okay.
no, I've just updated my PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yes, you're right. It was an oversight.
Okay.
And so I caught it when I was doing this
Yeah.
presentation. Yeah. So that's what the long-term spending, you can see there's some really big spikes in 2019, 2020, 2021, because the ability to project and forecast what we're going to be needing to spend in the first 3 or 4 years is quite good. It gets quite a bit lower in the future years. We've got a number of planning projects in the works that will hopefully help us accurately forecast the future years much better. So we've got the asset management plan that's coming up. There's a building facilities assessment review that's being done as well that's designed to help us identify what needs to be maintained, fixed.
Tanya, is the 2021 plan spending so large because that's the planned spending of the sewer upgrade?
No, this is just general capital, so it's the arena that's
That's
pushing
the
that one
arena
up.
that's in there, okay.
Yeah, it's the arena that's pushing that one up. Yeah, so the spike in 2019 is the roundabout. The reason it's still high in 2020 is because we start spending money on storm sewer renewal that year. We haven't actually spent any money really on it and for a number of years, and so there's going to be a bit of a spike up in the first year to get caught up, and then it'll settle out in the future years. 2021, as we discussed, shows the arena going on in that year. So.
Just one more thing, the public might be interested in.
Yeah.
The roundabout, it's a $5 million, $5.5 million project.
Yes.
And $490,000 is funding from outside of the council, is that right?
4.9 million. Yeah, so in this rate here, it shows you that 400,000 of that's coming out of, or 401,000 almost, is coming from reserves, city funded, and then the rest of it's being grant funded.
So we
Yes.
have reserves set aside for that?
Yes, some of it comes from land reserve because we'll be having to do some land acquisitions in that area and things like that, and some of it's just coming out of general.
And it's just, again, it's just for clarity for the public.
definitely,
I think if they know that they're not going to get hit with a $6 million project.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm the finance person, I see these numbers all the time, but it's good because I don't always see it from the layperson's perspective. So there's the 5-year water utility capital plan, so there's 17 million being spent in that fund over the next 15 years, but this is just a highlight of some of the amounts for the next 5 years. A bunch of little things going on in that list there, but we do have the Illicilloit water crossing, some spending on what we call rehabilitation and renewal of the water system, the pipes. And then there's a replacement of a Greeley filter that needs to be done in 2020. So, and then it goes down from there. So the hydrant replacement program, that's a 5-year number, so it's that amount over 5 years. Yeah, and they're same with the fire flow upgrades. That's 19 to 2023, so it's 5 years worth too.
Awesome. I'm seeing that the Illicilloit water crossing was also not.
Yes,
identified.
none of the DCCs. I've got them in this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to share the slides from today's presentation as well? with the
Yeah,
public?
yeah,
That'd be
definitely.
great.
Yeah, yeah. You'll have to remind me that, Cindy. Because
Someone pointed out to me that the slides don't come up in the video
no, they probably
of
don't.
this.
Oh,
So as we're discussing, if we
Yeah.
could just mention a highlight of,
Yeah.
we're looking at this slide right now, so if anyone's
Yeah.
watching afterwards, they can
Yeah.
match that to that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Oh, is the camera on Tanya?
Yeah, so
They should move it to there.
this is slide 16. It's the, it just shows the spending levels for the next 15 years. Again, showing larger amounts in the first couple of years, and then it kind of levels off. And so as we get better at projecting and forecasting the 15 years out, then we'll probably have larger numbers coming out in the future. Most of it is maintenance and renewal of existing infrastructure, with some money being spent on master plans that will help us to forecast long-term capital needs. Sewer, again, 27.8 million over 15 years. This is the 5-year major plans in the next 5 years. Obviously, the sewer treatment plant upgrade is the biggest number there, and it is predominantly grant funded. So the comment about that is if we don't receive the full amount of the grant that we're expected, then the project will be reviewed, and the council it'll be discussed with council as to what we will do going forward. So we won't be spending 13.6 million if we don't get a $10 million grant. And then the rest of it's pretty much maintenance costs. Lateral rehabilitation renewal, second screen at the sewer treatment plant, some lift station work, and a bunch of other things. Some plans in there again, liquid waste management program, and asset management plan and the sewer master plan are all in there as well. And again, those will help us because these numbers, it looks really tiny for the rest of the years because it's so big in 2020. They're not really that small, the numbers in the rest of the years. They just look small because when you compare them to 14 million, they look small. So, yeah, so most of that, again, is really coming down to maintenance and renewal of the existing assets. So we're going to look a little bit at the reserves and surpluses. My apologies for the colors here. I tried to make them a little bit more distinctive. They don't show up. The first darkest bar is our operating surpluses that are projected at the end of the next 5 years. The second bar is what we call our restricted operating surplus. So it is an operating surplus, but it's restricted in use. It's for our tax, it's what we call our tax stabilization. It's there for some rather large appeals that are outstanding and that haven't been resolved. And so we've been putting money aside in anticipation of having to pay that money out. So I'm still showing it there growing because I don't know when that money will have to be paid out. The next bar is the capital reserves. This covers things like our financial stabilization reserve fund, our general capital reserve fund. We have a greening reserve fund, an IT, a public art, transportation, and a vehicle and equipment replacement reserve fund that are all represented by that middle bar. This is probably the one that gives me the most concern. At the end of 2020, it's projected to have less than $90,000 in it. And so if we have anything that comes out of the woodwork when we're doing our 2020 plan, we have to shift things around a bit or increase taxes because $90,000 isn't much of a buffer to have for all of those funds.
Sorry, Tania, that was the capital reserve?
That's the general capital. It's the middle one.
So at 2020 there, it's sitting above $1 million.
But that's a bunch of different reserves all built in together.
Okay,
so
so
there's
you were
one in
saying-
particular
which
in
one's
there,
that
the general, what we call the general capital. So that's the one we use to maintain all of the recreational facilities, city hall, the courthouse. All of our old buildings get maintained out of that particular reserve fund.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Sorry to go back,
Yeah.
but while on that topic of sewer,
Yeah.
I was wondering, you mentioned that most of those costs are allocated for maintenance. Are there any plans to address the smell? And I think we've talked about it as council, but since the public might be watching, it might be nice to fill them in on.
My understanding is the smell was addressed in 2018. Is that correct?
So we're assuming there's no...
Yes, the work is being done, and it was done. It was part of the 2018 capital budget. There's quite a bit of money spent, and we're hoping that that is going to solve the problem. Mike?
Mr. Thomas.
Your Worship, as we do further upgrades to the treatment plant, we improve the capacity of the treatment plant to deal with the sewer overall. One of the benefits of improving the capacity of treatment is that it will also deal with any odours that might occur as a result of it being overwhelmed. So there'll be less chance that the treatment capacity is overwhelmed. So we are quite pleased with the performance of the upgrades that we did last year. This summer will be pretty telling as to whether those upgrades were as successful as we're hoping they were. Part of our liquid waste management plan process is to identify if there's further upgrades that we would need to do to address odour, which will come as a result of understanding the next couple of summers of living with what we've installed.
If you can, Chair, if those costs are to increase capacity, like you mentioned, is that just because it'll be operating more efficiently, able to process more, like you're not actually increasing the capacity, or did we?
Yeah. So so first of all, the upgrades to the aeration system that we did have increased the treatment capacity of the existing plant by improving the amount of oxygen that's going into the lagoon. We still have the capacity to put more aerators in. We're actually using a lot less air and power than we were before because the aerators that we've installed are so much more efficient. So we could theoretically, if we wanted to add, another 3 or 4 or more aerator heads at a cost, but we could put those into the lagoon on the system that we've got now if we thought that would improve treatment. We don't believe that's necessary right now. Moving forward, we will at some point reach our treatment license discharge capacity. So that is the Ministry of Environment, how much effluent we discharge to a body of water. In this case, it's the Illicilawit River. When we do that, we will be increasing not just the license discharge amount, because they're not going to let us just discharge more just because we ask. They're going to say you need to meet some treatment requirements. And so part of those treatment upgrades that would be proposed will obviously improve the capacity of the treatment system to meet those new effluent requirements. As a result of those, we're confident that there won't be a worsening of the odour issue, and we're quite sure that it will be an improvement. So as we move forward through the liquid waste management process, there'll be a lot of public consultation. This isn't something that we would be just getting the grant and constructing next year. It has to go through a public process because of the licensing issue with the province. They require us to go through a public consultation process.
Councillor Witt?
I think as a part of that liquid waste management plan, is it fog, the grease, is that part of the strategy?
Yes, one of the, there's many parts to the liquid waste management plan, including stormwater management, influent infiltration, source control, which is fats, oils, and greases. So we can definitely look at things that we've already done and add those into our liquid waste management plan. And it's all, so the province has a standard template for what they're looking to see in the liquid waste management plan. And we would be able to say, oh, and this piece that we did on stormwater will fit section 5 point whatever of the liquid waste management plan. And this will be, so if we've done a fats, oils, grease, sort of prevention and education program, well, that will fit into that source control piece. So, yeah, I think it definitely all sort of fits together. Big picture, this is the planning document that will allow us to increase our license discharge. And so we need to be checking those boxes as we go down. Some of them will be works in progress. We'll say we plan to do this, and that might be a condition on our permit that we actually do those things in the future if we haven't already.
Any other questions, councillors?
So that kind of leads into the next bar, which is the second to last one, and that is the utility reserves. It is quite small in the beginning, and then it grows, and that is a reflection of the rate increases that were approved for 2019. Those were to build these reserve funds, the utility reserve funds, because they were quite low. And so that is one thing to comment, is that the sewer, treating the sewer odor issues, the money, the pot of money that comes out of is not the same pot of money that the 4.5% tax increase is for. It is, that comes out of sewer rate fees. And so if there's any more money that needs to be spent on treating that odor issue or any other issues at the sewer treatment plant, it would then come out of the sewer rate fees and that 10% increase that's in there, rather than the 4.5% tax increase that we're proposing for general operations. So, and then the last one is the restricted reserves. There's a number of different larger reserves that are in here. One of them is what we call the Electric Utility Reserve Fund. And this is a reserve fund that was created, I'm going to say in the 80s maybe. I don't actually remember when it was created. It was from the sale of a electric utility that the city used to own. We used to have a electrical generation unit over on the Illicilawit River, and we sold it to BC Hydro. And so at that time, the council, the day when it was sold, took the money from that sale and stuck it into a restricted reserve fund. And the qualifier for the use of that fund money is if it can be used to fund investments that will help generate cash flow for the city, because there was a loss of cash flow with the sale of the electric utility. And so historically that is being used as the seed money for our CFC and our CEC. So it sits at a fairly even $2.5 million of that fund. It also includes in it the, what was the other one? Sorry. Yeah, sorry, that is the biggest one that's in there. See, it's just around $4 million. And that, so the reason you see it going down over the years is because that reserve fund is being used to loan money to the vehicle and equipment reserve fund, because that reserve fund doesn't have enough money in it to fund some of the larger equipment replacements that need to be happening in the next little while. And I believe next year we have a sweeper and Vector truck. And so that's a large amount of money, and the reserve fund for the vehicle and equipment doesn't have enough money in it to do that. So I'm borrowing from the electric utility reserve fund. So if I didn't show those transfers in there, you'd actually have, the bars might even be below the zero mark for some of the reserve funds if we weren't doing internal borrowings.
Tanya, are your DCCs in the restricted reserves?
Oh, yes, they are. They're part of the restricted surpluses as well, restricted reserves, yeah.
Okay.
Councilor?
No, that was the question.
Actually, I think, I'm gonna qualify that. I believe they're in there. I'm pretty sure they're in there. I think they are. So that's the reserves and surpluses. As you can see, there's some strong areas and there's some weak areas. Yeah. Yeah.
The operating surplus, is there a set mark you're trying to achieve?
There is. It's 8 million for the general, and that's actually all three. So that's water, sewer, and Big Eddy water, and general, Big Eddy water, water and sewer surpluses. And so the general one is projected, it should be 8 million, and it's based on historical spending. And so the optimal level of the operating reserve surplus is about $8 million, and that represents 6 months worth of expenditures, operating expenditures, not capital, just it would allow the city to continue on. If there was something that drastically happened, it would allow the city to continue on. That's not where we're at, obviously. We're not even close to that, so yeah.
So the $3.5 million that we collected extra on top of last year, the operating expenditures, we put into a capital reserve.
Yeah, I don't know if there's 3.5 million extra. Oh, you're talking about the reserve transfer?
Yeah, that
Yes,
was the
sorry,
reserve
yes.
transfer that was-
Yeah.
that was at the end of the-
Yeah,
and then
but
we also-
that's, yeah.
And then we also had a $2 million surplus.
No, oh, in 2018, or 2017, you mean?
Just
No,
on
because
this-
2018 we don't have out yet. We don't know what the surplus is.
Maybe it's the last sheet I had. That
Yeah.
had $2 million, but that was the surplus from operations for 2018.
Yeah, it won't be that high though.
2017.
Yeah.
No, 2018 on my numbers. but-
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just curious where you put that. That would go into your operating surplus. Is that correct?
It depends on what causes the surplus, operating surplus in a given year. So there are certain policies we follow with regards to if snow removal is under or over budget, then we can shift money in and out of our financial stabilization reserve fund. RCMP, if they're significantly under budget, then some of that under budget will get shifted, that budget savings will get shifted into the stabilization reserve fund. Same with if a department in particular has higher revenues than expected, so the development services is a good example. I don't budget for really high revenues because you can't guarantee you're going to get them, and you shouldn't be basing your spending on that. So if they bring in revenues that are substantially higher and their costs aren't substantially higher, then that difference will also go into that stabilization reserve fund. And that's the reserve fund we use when Darren spends way too much on snow removal in winter. So that's the reserve funds. And then debt. And so the debt management and the financing and funding policies that the city have provide us with guidance when making decisions about how to fund projects. So there was new debt borrowed in 2019 for the Thomas Brook and the Big Eddy water projects. So the cost of those two debts will be fully paid for by the residents in that area, in those two local area services that are being established. We've got new debt being borrowed in 2020, though it doesn't make, this is your debt servicing cost, so it doesn't make a huge increase to the overall. But there is new debt being projected for the sewer treatment plant in 2020, and then in 2021 for the arena roof. So after that, though, there are some debts falling off as well, so that's why you'll start to see it going slowly going down. We have a number of road rehabilitation borrowing that we did over the years in 2001, 2003, 2005, and 2008, and they will all be fully paid for within the 15 years of this plan. The RCMP building will also be paid for. Unfortunately, that means we will get less rent money from the RCMP Division E because they pay us rent based on the debt payments we have to pay as well as the operating, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that one. The new ladder truck that was bought in 2014 will also be paid for in 2028. And then the aquatic center, Councillor Elliott, you were asking about that. We borrowed that in 2005, and it will be paid off in 2030. So there's a number of amounts, and so that's why you see. So as we pay down, as our costs for debt servicing costs on an annual basis decrease, and these loans fall off the books, that money will then be added into, it just goes straight into the applicable reserve fund. So if it's road rehabilitation, it means I'll increase the transfer to reserves to the transportation and infrastructure reserve. If it's the aquatic center, then it'll get transferred into the general capital reserve. The RCMP building will be the same thing. The money we're saving, we're already taxing for it, and so we'll use those savings to build up the reserve fund so that hopefully we don't have to borrow when it comes time to build the next one.
Tania? I noticed in 2020 there seems to be a drop on this chart versus the public consultation document.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Sorry, I have to look at the two.
Okay, no worries. It's
Yeah, this is, you might be looking at debt levels, and this is debt servicing.
no, I'm looking at debt service.
Oh, are you? Okay. Okay.
Anyways, it's interesting, but at some point you can follow up after.
Yeah, definitely. Not sure why there'd be a difference there. Actually, I was going to talk to you about the filtration plant for the water filtration plant. That one also comes off the books in 2020. The Arrow Heights Reservoir will be paid for in 2029. And then there was some desludging that was done in 2012 that will be paid for in 2027. Hopefully we won't have to borrow for that the next time we have to desludge. I don't think we did we, Mike? I don't think we did. We haven't done it again since 2012, have we? Desludge the lagoon? No, we won't need to. Oh, there you go. That's even better. Yeah. Okay.
Just for clarity,
Yeah.
you borrow from a government agency or
Municipal Finance Authority.
right, and the rates are very good. Typically, they're
They
2
are,
to 3%.
yes. Yeah, they're definitely better. They're as good as what they're usually around prime. Yeah, so they're pretty good. So now for just a little bit of a history lesson. So this graph shows you the average historical tax increases. The first bar is residential tax increases every year, the blue one. The light gray is business and other, which is class 6. And then the gray one is the overall tax increase for all of the years. So the highest year for residential, as you can see, was in 2009. It was 7% that year. The lowest year was 14 to 16. It was 2% each year. So the average overall increase in residential taxes over the 10 years has been 3.9%. Businesses, it's a little bit different. The highest is still the same at 7%. Businesses had no tax increase in 2011, so that would have been their lowest year. And on average over the 10 years, they've seen a 2.4% per year average increase. Major industry, I didn't show that one separately on there. It was starting to get a little bit cluttered. But they've actually seen, they've had the highest tax increase. They had a 23.3% increase one year. And it was the year that we set, the second year that we linked the major industry rate to the light industry rate. And so it had to do with the fact the assessment values went in different directions and major industry suffered for it. They've also, though, had the biggest tax decreases. The biggest tax decrease they saw was 19.8%. From 2009 to 2012, major industry had decreases of an average of 16% a year. And that was the council today recognizing the importance of our major industry in this town and trying to assist them with staying.
Is the major industry, is that only Downey?
There is actually one other, but it's predominantly Downey, yes.
So, question, you're talking about that, but is there anywhere to show that?
No, it was getting really busy, the graph, and so I decided to take it out and thought, well, I'll just add some comments to that effect. Yeah. It starts to make, because they're negatives, they go down below, and it starts to make for a very, it's kind of hard to see on a big
Is there any way to maybe then, when you update this document, when you're comparing the graphs, maybe just put an asterisk with a note in there?
Yeah, I think, maybe, I could.
I don't know. Maybe I'm missing it.
No, I might have excluded it because, again, it does make for a very confusing looking graph when I include it. Yeah. So, and then the other one is utilities. So this is the increase. You can see the gray line is the percentage increase year over year of utilities, all utilities combined, and you can see that it's done some fluctuations. We're hoping that going forward, we'll be able to start to smooth that out by building up the reserve funds. So most of the years, the rate increase is about 5 of the 10 years, the water rate increases 2.5% or under. Sewer rates increases have been a little bit higher. That fund has needed more money than the water one. Garbage has been pretty flat. There was no increases for a number of years, and then otherwise it was about $2 a year, so it was like 2% increase per year. So, yeah. So I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Councillor Elliott?
There's a talk that we may be moving towards more recycling is one element that's been added to the waste removal.
No.
Is that right?
No, we don't pay for recycling. Recycling is paid for by, you keep changing the name. I think it's Recycle BC. Yeah, Recycle BC pays to remove all the recycling, yeah.
What about food waste? So that's something that's coming.
That's potentially, yes. I can't speak to whether or not that's coming or not. Is it? It's a CSRD, so it's CSRD. Oh, would we pay it? Oh, okay. Well,
So there's going to be a
potential increase, yes. If it's curbside, yes. There you go. So, stay tuned. More next year. And then a little bit of a comparison graph to show you where Revelston's. This is 2018 numbers, obviously, because 2019 are not published yet. Every year, all the municipalities in BC have to enter a lot of financial data into a provincial government website where they compile it all and then make it available to us to slice and dice and play around with as much as we want to. And so this is just the average taxes and the average fees that the average home pays. I know there's a lot of averages in there. And so the communities that have been picked in the past are in there. So Golden and Salmon Arm are in there because they're geographically similar to us. Somebody asked why I didn't include Sicamous. I could. So then Trail, Castlegar, Merritt, and Kimberley are all similar sizes to Revelstoke. And then Fernie and Rossland, they're both resort municipalities similar to Revelstoke, and so that's why they were included. So it just kind of shows you a little bit about what, if you own the average house in each of these communities, this is what your property taxes would compare like. So, and that's it. I am finished speaking. So I don't know if there's any
questions, councillors?
Just a comment on the last average position where compared to other, in comparison to other communities is a big starting point for me because I'm being new to the game here this term. I think that's value when we look at our DCCs, it's value in the police force, it's value in many different areas.
Yes.
So I think if we're going to make decisions going forward, placing us on a comparison list is big.
Yes, and it's
significantly.
There's quite a bit of data available for comparison purposes across all the municipalities in BC because we all put in all of our financial data, all of our assets, all of our liabilities, all of our expenses, our revenues, water, sewer fees. It's all entered into one big, huge database. So there's a lot of comparisons that can be made. Sometimes they're quite interesting to look at.
It's difficult to find reasonable comparisons, though, just because communities are quite distinct geographically, topographically, with their climate. An example, Revelstoke and Merritt have about the same number of linear kilometers of roads. Merritt's snow clearing budget is $100,000 a year. Ours is $1.3 million.
Yes.
So there's a big difference right there. There's a 10% lift on your taxes. You start. Fernie Rossland are good comparisons for us because they receive similar amounts of annual snowfall. Yeah. So you start looking at those types of things as well and see what its impact is. Look at Rossland's the highest there. They don't have the recreational amenities, the aquatic center that we have, and yet they still have really high fees and charges. So they're challenging, but they're interesting.
I think it just gives us a base, a starting point, and say, okay, why are they different? Vernon should be on there as well. Say, why are they different?
Yeah, one other thing that's interesting too is because if you start looking at tax rates and the dollars per thousand, and you start thinking about the assessment value per capita, and Sicamous has a favorable tax rate because they've got more dollars of assessed value per capita to raise rates on than we do. And there's really good provincial databases of municipal stats and figures.
I think, yeah.
Send me a link to it, you could go look at it.
Yeah.
All kinds of comparisons.
So the
You
guys
can
come in
geek
and
out on the
find-
numbers if you want.
Yeah, no, I don't want to go that deep, but I just think it's a starting point. Just give us a basis to work from, and then you say, we've had the variances along the way, and say, why are we different? Or why we should be comparing.
Yeah.
Councillor Juncker.
Thanks. Just a question for you, Tanya. About the Mount Baby old school that we know was just purchased from the school board for BC assessment. When it was still considered a school, those don't pay taxes to the city. But now that it's owned by BC assessment, will they now be paying taxes to the city? Will we be
Potentially.
collecting off of it?
Potentially.
BC
There could be a
BC
payment.
housing.
Yeah, BC.
Or sorry, we're not BC assessment, yeah,
Yeah,
BC
that's
housing, now that it's owned by BC housing.
Depending on what kind of, what it's used for and what's built there.
Well, prior
potentially.
to that though, because that's a few years.
Yeah, so the school district doesn't pay property taxes for any of the schools. And
Right.
so when a school property is changed over to a different use, depending on what the use is, will depend on what we collect. With BC housing, there is some properties of theirs that we get what we call a payment in lieu of taxes on from, but there's others that they have really low assessed values because they're considered to be supportive housing. And so you could get a tax rate, but if it's only assessed at a couple dollars, it's not going to add up to.
So we'll wait to see for that.
Exactly. It's definitely a wait and see.
Okay, thanks.
Councillors, any other questions or comments that you'd like to make on the presentation? Ms. McCabe, is there any letters or notes that you have that the public would have come forward with questions that you would
I
like to
haven't.
address?
I do have a number. I haven't brought them today. I will bring those back when we do the committee of the whole meeting on the 21st. I will bring back all of the comments because the public has until the 12th to provide comments on the budget, and so I'll wait until I've compiled all of it, until it's all been received, and then I'll compile it all and it'll be presented to council at that meeting, or the committee of the whole at that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm going to go to the gallery and ask if there's any of the community members that are present that have a question or a concern that you would like to address at this time. If so, I'm going to ask you to stand and address us. Any questions? No one has any questions, so I'm going to go back to the community and say, for those who are not present in the room or have seen the live stream, if you have questions or concerns, we have until the 12th of March to submit those. We'd like to answer those questions, but also we would like to hear your comments so that we can address them in council meeting and make sure that we've got things covered before we go forward with addressing our final tax rate increases. Councillor Juncker, any further questions?
Yeah, I just got a question for Ms. McCabe, Your Worship. Mayor Sulz sent you, or discussed with you the policing question that I had?
Yes.
Can I clarify on that, just because the email, I was confused a little bit. Our authorized strength, is 13.
Yes.
What are we budgeting for?
12.
Okay, so we're budgeting for 12. And then what's our current average in here? Is it currently 10.6 or 10.8?
Kurt's not here. I believe it was. My apologies. You're not in your uniform.
Your Worship, I can tell you that we're billing currently 10.53. That does change depending on transfers, injuries, vacancies. It fluctuates, but on average, we usually bill under 11.
Any further questions?
Yeah, can I continue?
You can.
Thank you. Okay, so just further to that then, I know that in the past council meeting, Mr. Chabot indicated that it was his personal belief that we should be budgeting for what our authorized strength is. And I was doing some own homework and found that some communities do that and some communities don't. Like Dawson's Creek right now are significantly under their authorized strength, which they also budget for, so they're going to cut their budget possibly by quite a few numbers to bring it down. But my question is then, if we're 10.53, but the staff sergeant said typically we're under 11, and we budget for 12, could we not possibly increase our authorized strength, and thus there wouldn't actually be an increase to the tax rate, because we'd still be budgeting for 12, and then if for some lucky reason, which would be terrific if we actually hit 12, and say it was in between this year and next, could we not just pull some funding from the reserve fund and then at that time next year make a decision on whether to
Yes.
increase the taxes?
Yeah, it's a possibility that can be done, yes.
Because we're still under, right, by 1.5 right now?
Yeah, we are.
And I think the staff sergeant indicated we were transferring out when 2 come in. So how would we go about discussing that?
I think that'd be something we could bring up after the budget process because it would be outside of the actual budgeting. If we're looking at increasing authorized strength later in the year, then we could look at doing that.
So just a question then, if we were to make that decision, hypothetically speaking, and then money needed to be pulled from that reserve, say, you know, hopefully our officers were healthy and we hit, say, that 12, and we're only budgeting for 12 and went over, is that a council decision that then gets brought to council to pull that reserve, or is that just a finance
No,
decision?
that would be a finance decision.
Okay, I was just wondering on how.
But if we did it for 1 year, then we would be looking at the numbers for the following year when we're doing the budget
Right,
to
increase.
determine whether or not we think it's going to continue, and if it was going to continue, then we would need to budget more.
Right, okay. And, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just had one other question, because I was looking and I was confused. Have we added 2 positions in the last 2 years, or 1 position in the last 2 years?
There's been 2 positions added since I've been here, but that is the last 2 years. We went up from 11 to 12 when Jackie was here.
Staff Sergeant, can you answer that question to the council?
Your Worship, it was a confusing process. I arrived here 5.5 years ago. We were a detachment of 12 people. We were only funded strength of 11. The additional 12th position had been approved by City Council, authorized to be filled. The person who was going to fill it never did move here. After that didn't happen, the funding for the position disappeared, and we continued being 11 on the books funded, 12 authorized. Nice and confusing. We then increased or created that position. We were authorization to create that position. We went to 12. And then last year, we were authorized to 13 with our GIS position. So that's where we sit today.
Yeah, I've got more.
Thank you. So confusing.
Councilor Elliott?
So we have allocated 12 funds for 12 people.
Yes, I budget for 12 because we have historical vacant, because we have a historical.
It seems like why don't we get 12?
How did we get 12?
We're not saying, no, but we should be paying for it. We're now at 10,
Yeah.
10.7.
Yes.
But how do we get 12 here?
How do we get 12? That's a good question. I'd like to know the answer
This is
to
a
that.
question we're going to ask Staff Sergeant Gurminski, and he can explain the process again. Staff.
Your Worship, we are authorized right now for 13. So if I can get and maintain 13 officers full-time, that's what the city would receive as an invoice. Historically, however, we are under that due to injured members who after 30 days are not billed, costed to the city at all. Vacancies, so when people depart, that once they leave, they are no longer billed to you. Transfers, injuries, long-term medical, those all add up. So on average, we bill around under 11, even though authorized strength is 13. To achieve 12 officers or more, 13, would mean that nobody would have to get hurt or transfer or anything happens to them. Historically in policing, that is not true. We have people who have been here for a period of time and they move. We also have injuries that occur on the job. It is the fact that we use force and encounter force. In order for us to achieve 12, that is why I come to you asking for an addition of more, so I can achieve 12. It is a strange principle, but I ask, in order to achieve 12, you need 14 or 15.
So if we gave approval to hire one more, 14, there's no impact on our budget. Is that right?
Well,
we've
because-
already got 12 allocated.
Yeah, I budget for 12, and so
Yeah.
based on the law of averages, which is what finance people like to work on, I budget for 12, and if Kurt was allowed to have 14, the chances are he might actually hit 12,
And no increase in our budget because you've already got it all.
because we're budgeted for 12.
Councilor Ryan.
If you don't meet that 12 threshold, where's the excess fund?
That goes into the stabilization reserve fund, which is why I would also use that to fund if we ever went over budget. If for some reason Kurt ever actually got 13 members for a whole year and we're only budgeting for 12, obviously there'd be a budget shortfall. And so that would then get funded out of that
So
stabilization
in the last,
reserve.
I don't know how long you've been here, have we always had a surplus every year?
Yes, I think 1 year there wasn't.
Councillor Young?
Your Worship, just what Councillor Elliott said, like it just, again, when I've been doing my homework the last, like I think, I might be wrong, but I was reading through news reports, it was almost an 18% average, like vacancy across the whole province for policing with the RCMP. Like all cities are mostly authorized here, but because, yeah, people are sick and transfers and just lack of staffing. But my question then for Ms. McCabe, through the chair, if I may, Your Worship. So if we're authorized 13 and budget 12, and we're only at, I think,
10.5.
sure, 10.5, why did we put a possible increase in there? Were you going to increase the budget to 13 then?
A possible increase? Oh,
Well, when you were
yes.
talking about the
Yes.
original member, were you planning on increasing
Yeah, because
the
there was-
budget
yes,
cost? Because
that
there was
was-
2,
yes.
and then there was the 1. So with the 1, you were still going to increase the budget to 13?
There was, yes, so that's one of the options. So we could actually, if we authorized an additional RCMP officer, we could also budget for it.
Or we could authorize and not
We
budget?
could authorize and not budget, which is being done in the past.
It's kind of
Like I said, you have to watch it, you have to be a little bit careful because obviously it's a little bit more to the line, you're budgeting closer to the line at that point.
Right.
And so obviously you have to be a little bit cautious. And so historically, there was never a built-up stabilization reserve fund to use if we went over budget significantly. And so that's where we built that up now over the last few years. And so, because Darren didn't spend a lot of money on snow removal for a couple of winters.
And so, Councillor, sometimes we consider it prudent to give the tax burden so that we can build up those reserves so that if we reach this sort of thing. And that's kind of what we were looking at with our first go-arounds of the budget. It was being prudent and saying, okay, we'll have the financing there, we'll allow that to go forward. And then, so we didn't talk necessarily at length about what the options were and how that would lay out. We did touch on it briefly, but we didn't go into length of that. So we can reconvene that conversation as we go along, if that's something that you want to talk about.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'm just, you do happen to have the number of what's in that specific emergency reserve right now?
Not off the top of my head, no.
And then just one last question just regarding that, if I may, Your Worship. If we were to, saying hypothetically here, just hypothetically speaking, if it went back, the council approved, and I think it was estimated to be 0.3 or 4 because by the time somebody arrives, it would be in the fall. And then next year, so then that would increase our authorized to 14, and theoretically would be budgeting for 13, but the 0.7 or whatnot would be paid next year. Hypothetically speaking then, if we did that budget, and then at the end of this year, coming into budget talks next year, and staff sergeant's still struggling to still even fill, could then council then consider bringing that back down? That's another option? Okay. Thank you.
Clear as mud, right?
It's,
I mean, it's kind of
yeah.
confusing, but there is actually a lot of options, I think, to be considered to get creative. I mean, was the press release put out yet today, or is there any press releases going on?
Numbers, population numbers.
I just wanted to
Tell us on
Ms.
On the website, I believe.
Yeah, Ms. Braun, is that TELUS Insight gone public?
It's posted on the CD website, yes.
Okay, it's on the development website?
can I speak it?
Yep.
Yep, you can speak about what you received, yep.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, okay. So, have you guys all read that?
Yeah.
Right, so, just to talk about this for a few minutes then. I know the comments that I made at the previous council meetings about looking at statistically the averages of the officers per capita and whatnot, and I know we've all known, obviously, that there's a lot more people living here than it's actually known, but I think, again, just repeating the few incidents that I've had at my workplace the last few weeks needing the service of the RCMP, and they're doing their best to get there when they can, which I think we need to, I'm against the communications officer just because we need to keep the tax increase relative as much as we can, or low, I should say. But I think we should really consider here looking at the option of getting creative with the RCMP, whether or not that's, doing a tax increase and increasing authorization, or if council wants to not increase the budget, but then give the authorization to increase the strength, is something that we should really consider looking at. Knowing that there could be money in the reserve fund to meet the shortfall if we had to, but I just think it's a conversation that we need to have, and I'd ask that you all think about it for the next council meeting. because seen as the TELUS Insights, the RCMP are actually policing a permanent community of more than double what they're told that they are by the census. So same could be said for the fire department when we look into that. But as far as policing, I just would encourage you guys all to think about it for the next meeting, because I will be asking that we make a different decision.
And there'll be other comments coming in from the public up until March 12th, so we want to give some weight to the comments that come in as well, and we'll weigh those in a subsequent meeting and have a discussion on that. Councillor Elliott?
I agree. I think if we get 13, we get 10. We get 14, we get 12. We've already got 12 budgeted. I don't see this as a stretch to request another RCMP officer. And if we go over, we pull it out of the extra reserve. But I just, and I think we're creating a bit of a fuss over something that doesn't really, we're already allocating the money to it. It seems to me like we're going around on this unnecessarily. So, and then, but on the TELUS thing, I think that's, it's early. Doubling our size from 75 to 14,000 may be valid for a short period, but our census is
We're still waiting for parameters
I
to
think it's
come out.
really early.
So their words, and whatnot, you can use this as kind of a guideline as to the number that are there. And Ms. Braun has indicated and is working with the TELUS people to nail down some of the parameters so that we're able to kind of say this is definitive sort of thing.
And I think we should validate those numbers. There's some low-tech methods you can probably figure out to really get an assessment of our community. And I don't know what the TELUS Insight cost, but I think there's
But it's not finished yet. The definitive of all that whole process is not finished. Is that correct, Ms. Braun?
We have a full year update. Not until the end of April.
So there'll be more coming from the Economic Development Department as things go on, and Ms. Braun will keep us apprised and be able to indicate how the parameters of their the insight work is done, and so that we know exactly where we're at. And so they've given us some good stuff. Councillor Milker.
Your Worship, can I, if I may, through the chair, can I ask a question of the staff sergeant?
You may.
Thanks. Staff Sergeant, I was just wondering, with the shortage you're facing and with your resources right now, are your members, I saw the overtime costs, are they being able to go to their courses and extra courses that you need them to do, or are they having to be held back just to be able to maintain the current policing?
Your Worship, as much as we like, we want to send people for as much training as possible so they're well-rounded officers. We keep getting people directly from the training academy. So we do reduce the amount of training they can go to make sure that we cover as much time on the road with police officers at any one time to ensure the safety of police officers and the public.
Something to think about as well, guys.
So any other further comments from councillors regarding what you've seen today, or comments, questions that have been brought to you by members of the public?
So we're going to speak more about this at the next committee meeting then, when we hear the feedback?
Yeah, so there's a timetable that Ms. McCabe has in the package there in dealing with that stuff, and so we'll go forward. Mr. Chabot, any comments that you have at this point? Okay. Any comments from the staff? Everybody's so quiet. Thank you for being present. I'm going to ask for a motion to terminate this meeting. Councillor Ryan, well, before we go, I guess we'll answer Jocelyn, you're here, and Aaron, I can barely see you, sort of, you're back behind you. Do you have any questions? The press have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
If the public has like an overwhelming concern about something that's not in the draft budget, but was maybe in the past iterations of the document, can that still be brought forward?
I don't see why not, and we can answer that question if it's something that's prudent. It may not have any binding measure on budget if it's something that's been cut, but by the same token, we're open to the questions.
Okay.
All right.
Definitely looking for feedback.
Thanks.
Anything else? Aaron? No questions? All right, so I'm going